He showed his first-class ticket, sat down quietly, and just minutes later, a flight attendant told him to get up and move to the back. No questions, no explanation. But she had no idea who he really was. 4 minutes later, her career was over. Before we start the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from today. And if you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the bell icon. He sat quietly in seat 1C, placing his black leather briefcase under the seat in front of him. His name was Bilal. His navy blue suit was clean and perfectly pressed. His watch glinted under the cabin lights, and he held a thick business file on his lap. His expression was calm, focused, as he flipped through the pages while passengers boarded around him. It wasn't his first flight. In fact, he had flown hundreds of times before, but this flight felt important, not because of where he was going, but because of what he had to say when he got there. His company had just finalized a massive deal overseas, and he was due to meet with board members the next morning. Everything was running smoothly, until she stopped at his seat. The flight attendant, dressed in a spotless uniform, paused in front of him. Her name was Madison. She didn't smile. Instead, her eyebrows pulled together as she looked Bilal up and down quickly. "Sir," she said, her tone already carrying a note of irritation, "may I see your boarding pass?" Bilal looked up from his file, surprised, but he didn't argue. He reached into his jacket pocket and handed her the pass. Madison stared at it, then at him, then at the seat, as if trying to connect a puzzle that wasn't fitting. "This is for seat 1C, she said slowly, like she was explaining something to a child. "This is a first-class seat." "I know," Bilal replied simply. Madison's lips tightened. "Are you sure this is your seat? First class is for premium passengers only." A few heads nearby turned slightly. No one said anything, but they were clearly listening. Bilal didn't raise his voice. He stayed still. "That's my seat. I booked it a week ago." Madison took a breath and crossed her arms. "Do you have any proof of purchase? Did someone give you this ticket?" Bilal blinked, still trying to process her tone. "Number, I paid for it. Myself." She gave a forced smile, one that didn't reach her eyes. "Sir, I think there might be a mistake. You should come with me. We'll get it sorted in the back." There was a silence between them, heavy, tight. Passengers glanced at each other, some frowning, others pretending not to notice. Bilal looked down at his briefcase. Then quietly he stood up, picked it up again, and walked down the aisle with her. Not once did he argue. Not once did he raise his voice. But every step he took felt heavier than the last. No one stood up for him. No one questioned it. Not yet. When they reached the back of the plane, Madison pointed to an empty seat near the restrooms. "Please take a seat here. We'll notify the gate if there's a seating issue." Bilal sat down, opened his phone, and sent a message. "They just moved me from first class to the back. Didn't believe the ticket was mine." He didn't add anything else. He didn't have to, because the person on the other end of that message already knew exactly what that meant, and exactly what needed to happen next. On the other end of the message, Farah read the text with a still face. She was sitting in a quiet meeting room, flipping through a thick report when her phone buzzed. The message from Bilal came through with no emojis, no punctuation, just calm, controlled words. But she knew him well. She knew what he didn't say, and what he didn't say was louder than anything in the room. Farah wasn't just anyone. She was the chief operating officer of the airline, a woman who had worked her way up from ground staff to executive leadership. Sharp, respected, and not the type to wait when something needed fixing. She picked up the phone and dialed directly to the captain of Flight 498. Her voice was steady, quiet, but firm. "There's a serious issue on board," she said. "One of our board members has just been moved out of first class by a flight attendant. His name is Bilal. Seat 1C. The captain, a tall man named Raymond, froze on the other end. "Bilal? That Bilal?" "Yes," Farah said sharply. "That Bilal. Do not take off until this is addressed. Call the flight attendant to the cockpit. Now." Captain Raymond stood from his seat in the cockpit, reached for the in-flight phone, and pressed the call button to the cabin crew. His co-pilot, Lena, looked over at him with a puzzled expression. "Everything all right?" "No," Raymond muttered. "Everything's about to go very, very wrong for someone." A few seconds later, Madison's voice came through the speaker. "Yes, Captain? Please report to the cockpit immediately." She hesitated. The request wasn't common, and the tone in his voice didn't sound routine. Madison adjusted her scarf, straightened her jacket, and began walking toward the front of the plane. Her heels clicked softly against the floor as she passed the seated passengers, many of whom had already noticed something strange had happened. She didn't make eye contact with anyone, not even with Hannah, the younger flight attendant, who had quietly observed the earlier exchange and hadn't said a word. When Madison stepped into the cockpit, she was surprised to see the small screen glowing with a video call already active. On the screen was Farah, her face calm, but her eyes sharp and unreadable. "Madison," Farah began, "I want you to tell me what just happened with the passenger in seat 1C. Madison blinked. "I moved him to economy. His ticket looked suspicious. I thought maybe he got it from someone else. He didn't seem like he belonged in first class." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy, cold. Farah didn't react right away. She didn't blink, didn't move. "The man you removed," Farah said slowly, "is one of the main shareholders of this airline." Madison's throat went dry. I didn't know." "That's exactly the problem," Farah interrupted, her voice cutting clean through the air. "You didn't know. You didn't check the manifest. You didn't verify anything. You assumed." The captain remained silent, his jaw clenched. Lena glanced away, suddenly interested in the instrument panel, though her hands were perfectly still. Farah leaned slightly forward on the screen. "You are to walk back to him, apologize in front of the passengers, and escort him back to his seat. Now, and when this plane lands, you'll report to my office immediately." Madison's voice cracked. "Is this official?" Farah's eyes narrowed. "It became official the moment you made a decision based on how someone looked instead of what was on their ticket." Madison turned, her face pale, her legs unsteady. For the first time in her career, she wasn't giving instructions, she was following them, and the walk back to economy felt like the longest of her life. As Madison made her way down the aisle, the energy inside the plane had changed. It was subtle, but passengers felt it. Whispers had already started after Bilal was moved earlier, and now seeing the same flight attendant return with a different look on her face, tighter, less certain, eyes began to follow her. Bilal sat silently in his new seat, hands resting calmly on his lap. He hadn't moved since sending the message. He didn't look angry, he didn't look shaken, but his silence had weight. When Madison reached his row, she stopped, took a breath, and crouched slightly to speak to him at eye level. "Sir," she began, her voice quieter than before, "I'd like to escort you back to your seat in first class. There was a misunderstanding." Bilal looked at her, face still, eyes steady. "A misunderstanding?" he repeated. Madison nodded quickly. "Yes, there was an error. I didn't mean to." "You didn't mean to question my seat?" Bilal said softly. "Or you didn't mean to question why someone like me was sitting there?" The passengers around them grew quiet. A few leaned back, pretending not to listen. Others didn't even try to hide it. Madison opened her mouth, but no words came out. She stood there frozen, unsure what to say. Bilal slowly stood, picked up his briefcase, and looked directly at her. "Let's go," he said calmly. The walk back up the aisle was silent. Every step echoed louder than the last. First-class passengers turned to look as Bilal approached. Some shifted in their seats, pretending to be focused on their screens. A woman in seat 2A looked down at her shoes. A man near the front cleared his throat awkwardly. Bilal reached his seat. Madison gestured to it, her hand trembling slightly. "Seat 1C, she said, trying to sound normal. "Welcome back." Bilal placed his briefcase down, adjusted his jacket, and sat. He didn't say thank you. He didn't nod. He didn't have to. Madison stood there for a second too long, unsure if she should say more. But Bilal had already opened his file again. The message was clear. This conversation was over. She turned and walked back toward the galley, her stomach twisting with something she hadn't felt in years: shame. As she disappeared behind the curtain, Hannah stood near the coffee station, arms crossed. She didn't say anything, but her eyes followed Madison's every move. "You all right?" Hannah asked flatly. Madison didn't answer. She just grabbed a water bottle and held it too tightly. In first class, Bilal flipped a page in his file. His expression hadn't changed, but his phone buzzed again. A message from Farah. She won't keep her position after this flight. Bilal typed a short reply. I figured. And just like that, the silence returned. But this time it wasn't quiet. It was waiting. The plane cruised steadily at 35,000 feet, but inside the cabin, things didn't feel steady at all. Tension floated through the air like mist. No one was saying much, but almost everyone was thinking the same thing. Something serious had just happened. Madison stayed in the galley, pretending to organize trays and stir sticks, though her hands trembled slightly with every movement. She kept glancing toward the curtain that separated her from the first-class cabin. Every time she heard footsteps, her body tensed. But no one came for her. Not yet. Hannah leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching Madison with a calm that somehow made her presence louder. After a long moment, she finally spoke. You didn't check his name, did you? Madison froze for a second, then looked over with a sharp expression. I didn't need to. He didn't look like he belonged there? Hannah finished, not raising her voice. Just asking. Madison didn't reply. She turned away, fiddling with a stack of plastic cups. Hannah continued, her voice quiet but firm. You didn't check. You didn't verify. You just assumed. And now you're trying to fix something that probably can't be fixed. I followed procedure, Madison snapped. No, you didn't, Hannah said, standing up right now. Procedure is checking the manifest before making someone feel like they're not good enough to sit in a seat they paid for. Madison said nothing. Her jaw clenched. Her eyes burned, not with tears, but with the realization that someone lower in rank had spoken the truth she was trying hard not to admit. Up in first class, Bilal sat quietly, sipping water that Hannah had delivered earlier without saying a word. Her silence had felt respectful, not awkward, like she understood that he didn't want small talk, just peace. Every now and then, another passenger would glance his way, then quickly look away. No one said anything, but the air felt full of thoughts, regret, guilt, embarrassment. Not from Bilal, but from the people who had watched it all happen and said nothing. One man seated across the aisle cleared his throat softly and leaned slightly toward him. I saw what happened earlier, he said. That was unfortunate. Bilal looked at him, eyebrows slightly raised. Unfortunate? The man shifted in his seat. I mean, it shouldn't have happened. Bilal didn't respond right away. Then he said, You were sitting there. You saw everything, and you didn't speak. The man blinked, caught off guard. Well, I didn't want to get involved. Bilal gave a small, unreadable smile and turned back to his file. Most people don't. The man sat back slowly, unsure what to say next. The truth had landed harder than he expected, and it wasn't even loud. Meanwhile, back in the cockpit, Captain Raymond's phone buzzed again. He picked it up, glanced at the message inside. He knew what was coming next. And so did Madison, though she didn't want to admit it yet. The airline didn't just want an apology. They wanted accountability. And this wasn't going to wait until landing. The in-flight phone buzzed again. Madison flinched at the sound. She had been standing near the galley door, staring blankly at the safety instructions she had seen 1,000 times before. But now every beep and call felt like a spotlight turning her way. She picked up the receiver with a shaky hand. This is Madison. Captain Raymond's voice came through, calm but unmistakably stern. Please be advised, upon landing, airport security will be boarding the plane. You're expected to cooperate fully. I suggest you prepare. Madison's throat tightened. Captain, I already apologized. He's back in his seat. This isn't just about the seat, Raymond replied, and it's not just about one apology. Before she could respond, the line went dead. She slowly placed the phone back on the hook, her hands now cold. Her shoulders dropped. This wasn't going away. Not in the air. Not when they landed. Not even after. Hannah walked past her without a word, checking the coffee pot. The silence between them wasn't peaceful. It was full of everything Madison didn't want to hear. She grabbed a tray and stepped out into the aisle, trying to look busy. She moved slowly through the first-class section, offering drinks to passengers who barely made eye contact. Some nodded without a word. Others simply shook their heads. When she reached Bilal's row, she hesitated. He didn't look up. He was reading again, as if nothing around him had changed. But everything had. She forced a voice out. "Would you like something to drink? Sparkling water? Juice?" Bilal turned a page slowly, then looked up at her. "You didn't ask me that before," he said evenly. Madison blinked. "Excuse me?" "When I first sat here," he continued, "you didn't offer me anything. You didn't even greet me. You only asked if I was in the right seat." She stood frozen, tray in hand, words stuck in her throat. "I'll take a juice," Bilal said calmly, as if it were any normal request. Madison nodded quickly and walked back toward the galley, the tray shaking slightly as she held it tight. Her mind was racing. Nothing felt routine anymore. She poured the juice carefully, trying not to spill, and returned to his seat with a stiff smile. "Here you go, sir," she said, placing the glass down gently. "Thank you," Bilal said, his voice steady. Then he paused, looking her straight in the eyes. "I told my boss about you." The words hit harder than anything she expected. Her fingers twitched, gripping the tray tighter. "I see," she whispered. He took a sip of the juice, not breaking eye contact. "I guess we'll see what happens when we land," he said quietly. Madison turned without another word and walked away, every step heavier than the last. For the first time in her years of flying, she didn't feel in control of the aisle. She felt like the aisle was watching her, judging her, and preparing to close in. Madison returned to the galley, her hands trembling slightly as she set the tray down. Her uniform suddenly felt too tight, her collar itching against her skin. She stared at her reflection in the metal cabinet door. The neat hair, the crisp blazer, it all looked the same. But everything underneath had shifted. She had made a mistake, a serious one. And now the plane felt smaller, the walls closer. Hannah watched her silently. She didn't speak, but her expression said enough. Madison didn't bother pretending this time. She leaned against the counter, arms crossed, trying to collect herself. "You're really sweating this, huh?" Hannah said after a long pause. Madison looked at her sharply. "Don't start." "I'm not starting anything," Hannah replied, her voice calm. "Just saying. It's not every day someone gets removed from their seat and then escorted back by the same person who moved them." Madison didn't respond. "You embarrassed him," Hannah said, "in front of everyone. And now you're wondering why it's not over yet." "I already said I was sorry," Madison muttered. "But were you?" Hannah asked. "Or were you just scared?" Madison's mouth opened, but no answer came. She wasn't used to being questioned. She was used to giving orders, keeping control, not standing here being told the truth by a junior crew member who had seen everything unfold. "You didn't check anyone else's ticket," Hannah added, stepping closer. "Just his. That's not a misunderstanding. That's a choice." Madison clenched her jaw. "You don't know what it's like to make decisions based on assumptions?" Hannah interrupted. "I think we all know what that's like. The difference is you did it out loud. And in public." Silence stretched between them. Madison turned away, trying to busy herself again, but nothing she touched could distract her from the weight in her chest. In the front of the plane, Bilal remained still, his posture calm, but his thoughts focused. The attention hadn't stopped. People kept looking, not just because of what had happened, but because of the shift that came after. The shift in power, the shift in presence. The way he carried himself now, back in seat 1C, not with arrogance, but with quiet control. His phone buzzed again. "Farah. Security team confirmed. They'll board the plane on landing. Instructions are clear." Bilal looked at the message for a moment, then locked the screen and leaned back. He didn't need to respond. There was nothing more to say. Everything was already in motion. And somewhere in the back of the plane, Madison knew it too. She could feel it with every second that passed. The clock was ticking. The seatbelt sign would come on soon. And when the wheels hit the ground, so would reality. The hum of the aircraft filled the silence that now lingered over the entire cabin. Outside, clouds floated past the windows, but inside, everything had changed. First class was no longer just a place of comfort. It was the center of attention. Every passenger in that section had felt the shift. No one was watching movies anymore. No one was chatting. They sat quietly, pretending to be absorbed in seat menus and safety cards, but their eyes often flicked toward seat 1C. Bilal remained calm, one leg crossed over the other, sipping from the glass of juice Madison had delivered minutes ago. He didn't wear his authority loudly. There were no outbursts, no visible frustration, just quiet confidence. And that unnerved people more than anger ever could. He glanced briefly at the older man across the aisle, the same one who had tried to speak to him earlier. The man avoided eye contact this time, pretending to study the seatbelt instructions for the third time. It wasn't guilt Bilal wanted to see, it was honesty, but silence seemed to be the preferred language of most on this flight. In the galley, Madison sat on the small pull-down crew seat, elbows resting on her knees, head in her hands. The flight had nearly 2 hours left, but she wished it would land right now, just to get it over with. Her heart thudded in her chest, louder than the engine rumble outside. She had never felt this cornered before, not in all her years of flying. She thought about what she would say when they landed. Would she explain it was just a mistake? Would anyone believe her? She had made snap judgments before. People sneaking into upgraded seats, passengers faking status. But none of those situations had played out like this. Deep down, she knew why. This wasn't just about a wrong seat. It was about who she had decided didn't belong. Hannah walked in and leaned against the wall again, watching her. There was a pause before she spoke, her voice softer now. You ever think about why you assumed he wasn't in the right seat? Madison didn't answer. I mean, Hannah continued, you've worked on how many flights? You've seen all types of people. But today you looked at him and saw something else, something that didn't fit in your version of first class. Madison looked up slowly. It's easy for you to talk now. You weren't the one making the call. No, Hannah said, shaking her head. I was the one watching you make the wrong one. Madison stared at her, speechless. I wanted to say something, Hannah admitted, but I didn't. I let you do it. I thought maybe you had information I didn't. But when you walked past me with him, the look on your face told me everything. And what was that? Madison whispered. You weren't doing your job. You were defending your pride. Those words sat heavy between them. Madison looked away again, eyes stinging slightly, but she blinked it away. Apologies weren't going to fix this. Not anymore. She had already walked him to the back like he didn't matter. And now every move she made was being weighed, judged, and remembered. Up front, Bilal reached for his phone again. Another message had come through from Farah. Farah, media department already preparing a statement. Your name won't be mentioned, but the crew will be investigated. Just a heads up. Bilal typed a reply, then paused. His fingers hovered over the screen before he locked it without writing anything. He wasn't angry. He was tired. Tired of proving he belonged in rooms and meetings and seats like 1C. Tired of the double glances, the second checks, the forced smiles, and tired of people thinking a suit, a ticket, or a quiet attitude had to come with a certain look. Farah knew this wasn't going to be a simple internal matter. Stories like this didn't stay quiet. Passengers had seen it happen. Some of them would talk. Maybe someone had even recorded it. The story would come out, with or without names. And while Madison sat in the back trying to come up with a version of events that would protect her, Bilal wasn't thinking about revenge. He was thinking about how many people like him had been moved, ignored, or dismissed without ever getting walked back to their rightful seat. This time was different. This time the plane was still in the air. But the fall had already started. The minutes dragged. The cabin lights dimmed slightly, signaling the later stage of the flight. Most passengers settled deeper into their seats, but no one looked relaxed. There was too much unsaid in the air, too much weight pressing down on every silent aisle and every subtle glance. Madison remained in the back galley, arms wrapped tightly around herself. She hadn't spoken in a while. Even Hannah had stopped commenting. The tension had moved from sharp to quiet, and that quiet was worse. It left her alone with her thoughts, something she had been trying to avoid. Her mind replayed the moment over and over, the way she had stood in front of Bilal, doubting his seat, questioning his presence, making the entire cabin turn their eyes on him like he didn't belong. At the time, it had felt like control. Now it felt like exposure of her own assumptions, her own insecurities. What scared her the most wasn't what was going to happen when they landed. What scared her was how fast it had all happened. 4 minutes. That's all it had taken for one decision to twist her whole career out of shape. 4 minutes between the moment she asked to see his ticket and the message that had reached the desk of one of the most powerful people in the airline. She had no idea who Bilal was when she approached him. But now the weight of his position wasn't what frightened her. It was the weight of her own judgment. She had thought being in control meant staying firm, being decisive, making snap calls. But what she had done wasn't confidence. It was bias in action. And now she was the one sitting in the back of the plane, afraid to look anyone in the eye. In first class, Bilal shifted slightly in his seat. His face stayed calm, but inside he was watching everything. Every shift in tone, every awkward smile, every moment of silence that wasn't silent at all. It wasn't about revenge for him. He hadn't sent that message to Farah to ruin anyone. He had sent it because he was tired of letting these moments pass. He thought about others who had been treated the same way, who hadn't had someone like Farah on speed dial, or a name big enough to stir panic on a plane. How many had just accepted it? How many had walked to the back with their heads down, without any apology waiting for them at the end? A voice crackled from the speaker. It was Captain Raymond. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll begin our descent shortly. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened, tray tables up, and electronic devices stowed. Cabin crew, prepare for landing." The tone of the announcement was even, professional, but Bilal caught the slight edge in it, the kind of edge that comes when the captain knows more than the passengers. Hannah moved down the aisle to start final checks. When she reached Bilal's seat, she paused. "Is everything all right, sir?" she asked, her voice soft, respectful. Bilal looked at her for a second. Then he nodded once. "Everything's fine." But they both knew that wasn't entirely true. Hannah continued down the aisle, checking seatbelts. Behind her, Madison stayed hidden in the galley, hands pressed to her stomach. She had heard the announcement too, and with it, her nerves collapsed just a little more. The plane was descending, and so was her career. Every detail played in her mind now like a scene she wished she could rewrite. She remembered Bilal's calm voice, the way he hadn't raised it, even when she had spoken to him like he didn't deserve to be where he was. She remembered how steady he looked walking back to his seat, more powerful in silence than she had ever been with rules. Now, all the crew knew. The whispers had spread. The captain had told the team during a quiet exchange on the intercom. She had moved a board member, humiliated him, in front of the entire cabin. And soon security would be waiting at the gate. She imagined how it would look. An officer standing at the door, her name being called. People turning their heads again, not for instructions, not for service, but to watch her get walked out of the plane like a passenger with no return flight. This wasn't just about losing a job. This was about being seen for who she really was, and the version of herself she had never intended anyone to see. And Bilal? He didn't have to say a word. His silence had done more than her apology ever could. The city lights glowed faintly below as the plane began its slow descent through a darkening sky. Inside the cabin, the seatbelt sign chimed on, and with it came a final wave of tension that no one could ignore anymore. The usual end-of-flight chatter was gone. No clinking glasses, no casual laughs, just quiet. Eyes forward, thoughts loud. Bilal sat still, his body upright, eyes focused on the small window beside him. He could see the wing of the plane cutting through the air, the faint shimmer of runway lights ahead. But he wasn't watching the landing. He was thinking about the first few minutes of this flight and how different they looked now from where he sat. His phone was resting face down on his tray. He hadn't touched it again. He didn't need to. Everything was already in motion. A message from Farah hours ago had already set off the chain. Security notified. Ground team alerted. Internal memo circulating. And now in just a few minutes, the final part would begin. Back in the rear galley, Madison sat hunched forward, her fingers locked tightly together. She hadn't spoken to anyone since the descent began. Her earpiece was still in, but all she could hear was the sound of her own breath and the low murmur of passengers settling in for landing. She didn't dare step into the aisle again. Every second that passed dragged like a full minute. She thought about what would happen when the plane reached the gate. Her name would be called. There would be no warning, no time to compose herself. Just a firm voice asking her to step forward. She would be escorted out in full uniform, past passengers who had just watched her humiliate a man they now knew carried far more weight than they thought. And what terrified her more than being walked off the plane was what she had already lost before even leaving it. Respect, control, reputation. She had always been proud of her discipline, her clean record, her 10 years of service, her ability to stay calm under pressure. But today, none of that mattered. Today, one choice had shattered all of it. Not because of who Bilal was, but because of who she had chosen to believe he wasn't. She couldn't stop thinking about his face, how composed he was, how he hadn't yelled or accused or demanded anything. He didn't need to. His silence had been enough to fill every empty space on that plane. In first class, Bilal reached down and fastened his seatbelt, then adjusted his blazer. The lights above had shifted to landing mode, casting a soft glow across the cabin. He glanced around briefly. The other passengers were still avoiding his gaze. Some stared straight ahead. Others pretended to be asleep. The man across the aisle was nervously chewing his lip. It was strange how quickly power changed hands. How people who once looked at him with suspicion now couldn't meet his eyes. He didn't want to be the center of attention. He hadn't asked for this. But he knew, without a doubt, this moment would stay with everyone in that cabin. Not because he was rich, or powerful, or connected, but because they had seen what quiet dignity looked like when it stood up without saying a word. The nose of the plane dipped slightly as the wheels touched the ground. A soft thump rippled through the cabin as rubber met runway. No applause, no cheers, just quiet realization. The flight was over, but for Madison it was only just beginning. Captain Raymond's voice came on over the speaker. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until the seatbelt sign is off. We ask that you stay seated as the crew prepares for arrival procedures." In the cockpit, Raymond set the mic down and rubbed his forehead. He had flown dozens of international routes, handled storms, medical emergencies, engine alerts. But none of them felt quite like this. He looked over at Lena, who had stayed silent the entire descent. "She's going to take this hard," he said quietly. Lena gave a slow nod. She should. Farah's last message had come in moments before touchdown. "Ground security is at the gate. Please inform cabin crew." Raymond picked up the intercom and gave the final crew instructions. He didn't say Madison's name. He didn't have to. Everyone knew. Back in the galley, Madison stood up slowly. Her knees were stiff. Her mouth was dry. She reached for a bottle of water, but her hand stopped halfway. What was the point? There was no fixing it now. She smoothed her blazer, adjusted her badge, and stepped out into the aisle. The cabin door opened, and with it came the first glimpse of what was waiting outside. A tall man in a security uniform stepped inside. He looked straight ahead, calm and professional. Then came the words, "Flight Attendant Madison Clark?" Every head turned. The moment she had feared was here, and there was nowhere left to hide. Madison stood frozen in the aisle. Her hands gripped each other so tightly her knuckles turned white. She didn't answer right away. Her mouth felt dry. Her heartbeat roared in her ears, drowning out the quiet gasps and rustles from the passengers now openly staring at her. The security officer stepped forward, his voice firm but not aggressive. "Ms. Clark, you're requested to step off the aircraft immediately for questioning by airline operations." Every sound on the plane seemed to vanish. No one moved. No one spoke. Every passenger's eyes followed her like a spotlight that burned hotter with each passing second. The ones who had once smiled politely when she walked past with drinks now looked away, pretending not to watch. But they were all watching. Madison straightened her shoulders and forced herself to breathe. She glanced to her right. And there he was, Bilal, still seated in 1C, still calm, still watching, not smug, not smiling, just present. She held his gaze for a fraction of a second longer than she meant to. It was the first moment of honesty she'd had in hours. She looked away just as quickly and nodded stiffly at the officer. "Yes, I'll come." Her voice was small. She hated how small it sounded. She walked down the aisle slowly, the same aisle she had confidently patrolled for years, handing out meals and commands, holding authority like a shield. But today the walk felt longer than the entire flight. She could feel passengers shifting in their seats, stealing glances at her face, some whispering quietly behind hands, others silently judging. As she passed the last row of first class, she glanced at Hannah, who was standing near the galley. Hannah didn't say anything. Her face didn't hold sympathy or satisfaction, just calm, measured, like someone who had already accepted what this moment meant. Madison continued walking, step by step, past the curtain, past business class, into economy. Each step reminded her of the moment she'd walked Bilal in the opposite direction, the same path, but everything was flipped. Back then, her posture had been firm, her voice controlled. She'd thought she was doing her job, maintaining order, protecting first class from what she believed didn't belong. Now she was the one being removed. When she reached the door, the security officer stepped aside to let her exit first. The moment she stepped into the jet bridge, the air changed. It was colder, harsher. A second officer was waiting outside, and behind him stood a tall woman in a navy blue pantsuit, clipboard in hand, lips pressed into a firm line. It was Mira, head of internal flight operations. "Madison," she said without warmth. "Come with me, please." Madison followed in silence, her shoes clicking against the floor. No one spoke as they entered a side hallway, usually reserved for crew and staff. They passed other uniformed personnel who looked away quickly, avoiding eye contact. No one wanted to be the one caught staring at the fallout. Inside a small meeting room, a chair was pulled out for her. She sat down slowly, her back stiff, her fingers fidgeting in her lap. Mira placed her clipboard on the table, sat down across from her and folded her hands. "Do you know why you're here?" she asked calmly. Madison nodded slightly. "Because I moved a passenger who wasn't supposed to be moved." Mira raised an eyebrow. "Let's not soften it. You removed a paying passenger from their assigned seat in first class without verifying their information. You questioned the validity of their ticket. You assumed something was wrong, even when there was no evidence. I thought," Mira cut in, her voice firmer now. "You thought. That's exactly the issue. You made a judgment, and you were wrong. Not only was that man authorized to be in that seat, he sits on the board of this company. He's part of the team that signs off on performance reviews, budget approvals, and policy decisions." Madison's throat tightened. "I didn't know who he was." Mira leaned forward slightly. "You shouldn't have to know someone's title to treat them with basic respect." Madison didn't reply. "There's more," Mira continued. "This wasn't a private mistake. You made it in public. You humiliated a man in front of a full cabin. You moved him based on nothing but your assumption that he didn't fit your idea of who should be in first class." "I didn't mean to embarrass him," Madison said quietly. "I was following instinct." "Instinct?" Mira's tone was sharp now. "Your instinct is not a rule book. Your instinct is not a policy. Your instinct today was bias." Silence filled the room again. Madison sat still. She wanted to defend herself, to explain, to shift the blame to stress or routine or pressure. But there was nothing left to say. Mira opened a folder on the table and pulled out a printed document. "You are being placed on immediate unpaid suspension. A formal review will be conducted, and the board will decide whether your position is terminated permanently. You'll be notified in writing within 48 hours. Madison didn't move, didn't argue, didn't plead. All she could do was nod. Mira stood. "Someone will escort you to the staff exit. You are not to access any secure crew areas until further notice. You are not to discuss this incident with any staff or media. If contacted, you are to refer inquiries to legal." Another officer entered and gestured toward the hallway. Madison rose slowly. As she walked out of the room, the weight of everything came crashing down. Not just the flight, or the investigation, or the man she'd wronged, but the truth about herself, and the reality that the life she had built at 35,000 feet had come crashing down before the wheels even touched the ground. The sun was dipping low behind the airport terminal as passengers filed off the plane, each carrying their luggage, their silence, and the memory of what they'd just witnessed. For some, it had been nothing more than a strange, uncomfortable flight. For others, it had shaken something deeper. Most didn't say a word as they walked past Seat 1C, where Bilal remained seated, waiting as instructed. He didn't rush to stand. He had no reason to. He'd been patient the entire flight, and now he was the one in control of the timing. The captain had requested he remain seated until a private escort from the executive team arrived. A black car waited just beyond the gate. The airline wasn't taking any chances. Not anymore. As the last passenger exited, a soft knock came from the open cabin door. A woman in a sleek navy suit stepped inside. Her hair was pinned neatly, her expression composed. Her name was Amina, Chief of Client Relations, sent directly by Farah. "Mr. Bilal," she said gently, approaching his seat, "I'm here to escort you to the lounge. Everything has been arranged." Bilal stood, buttoned his jacket, and nodded. "Thank you." As he followed Amina out of the plane, the empty seats seemed louder than when they were full. Each row was a reminder of how the flight had begun, of how assumptions had spoken louder than facts. Outside, the terminal bustled with activity, but Bilal was taken through a private side hallway away from the main crowd. No cameras, no noise, just a clean path toward the first-class lounge where Farah would be waiting. They entered through a frosted glass door, the space inside warm and quiet. Leather chairs, soft lighting, and a large window that overlooked the tarmac. Farah stood near the window, arms folded, her face unreadable. Bilal entered and their eyes met. She didn't speak right away. She just gave a slight nod of respect. "You all right?" she asked finally. "I've had worse," Bilal replied calmly. "But thank you." Farah motioned to the seat across from her. "Please sit. I wanted to speak with you before I meet with the board." Bilal took the seat, leaned slightly forward, and rested his elbows on the armrest. "What's the plan?" Farah picked up a tablet from the table beside her. "Internal reviews already underway. Madison has been suspended. She's aware the decision is likely permanent. All cabin crew will go through new bias training, and the incident has triggered a broader investigation into complaint handling and passenger treatment." Bilal nodded slowly, listening, not reacting. "There's something else," Farah continued. "This wasn't just about you, and I think you know that. You've probably had this happen before. Different faces, different uniforms, same story." He met her gaze. "Too many times to count. That's why we're not just handling this privately," she said firmly. "There's going to be a policy change, a public statement, anonymous reporting tools for crew bias, review panels for passenger complaints. It won't fix everything, but it's a start." Bilal was quiet for a moment, then said, "And the apology?" "She asked to write one," Farah said. "To you." Bilal raised an eyebrow. "Did she write it?" "She did. Do you want to read it?" He considered for a moment, then shook his head. "Not yet." Farah set the tablet back down. "Understood." They sat in silence for a few seconds. Then Bilal said, "You handled this well." Quietly, quickly. "Thank you," Farah offered a half smile. "I've seen how things get ignored. Not this time." Just then her phone buzzed on the table. She glanced at the screen inside. "The board is ready," she said, standing. "They want to discuss how to roll this out." Bilal stood with her. "I'll let you handle it." Farah nodded. "You sure you don't want to join us?" He smiled slightly. "I've said what I needed to say. The rest is your sky now." Farah paused, then reached out and shook his hand. "We won't waste the opportunity." As Bilal stepped out of the lounge and walked toward the private exit, his pace was steady, unshaken. Behind him, policies were changing. Conversations were starting. The silence that had once followed moments like this was gone, replaced by action, by accountability, and by something Madison had never expected when she made her decision. A reckoning. One that wasn't loud, one that didn't scream, but one that would be remembered. Back in her small apartment, Madison sat on the edge of her bed, still wearing her uniform from earlier that day. The blazer was unbuttoned now, her name tag removed, but the weight of it still clung to her like a shadow. The room was silent, save for the low hum of the city traffic outside her window. Her phone lay face up beside her, the screen still lit with the last email she had received from Human Resources. Subject: Official suspension notice. Status: unpaid suspension, pending review. Next steps: internal hearing to be scheduled. Do not return to work or report to duty without written clearance. She had read it 5 times already. Every time the words seemed colder, more permanent, She kept waiting for it to feel like a misunderstanding, a temporary situation, something she could bounce back from with a warning, maybe a disciplinary session, but deep down she knew the truth. This wasn't going away. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, hands tangled in her hair. It had all happened so fast. 1 minute she was telling a man to move because he didn't look right for first class. The next she was the one being escorted off the plane in front of everyone. The memory of that moment was fresh and brutal. The way passengers turned their heads, some whispering, some just staring. The silent walk down the aisle she once walked with pride now felt like a hallway lined with judgment. What bothered her most wasn't the punishment. It was the clarity she now had after everything had settled. She had made a choice. No one forced her to question Bilal. No one ordered her to move him without checking. She had seen him, made an assumption, and acted like it was fact. She hadn't even realized she was doing it at the time. It felt natural, like something she'd done 100 times before. That's what made it worse. It had become automatic. She closed her eyes, replaying his face. The way he'd looked at her, not with anger or even disappointment, just quiet strength, dignity, like he had seen this happen before and was just waiting to see what she'd do next. He hadn't yelled. He hadn't argued. He just moved, and that had crushed her more than if he had screamed. Her eyes drifted to the email app still open on her phone. There was another message sitting in her drafts folder, an apology. She had written it 2 hours ago and reworded it 6 times. Each time she deleted and rewrote parts, unsure how to make it feel sincere when so much damage had already been done. She picked the phone up again, her thumb hovering over the send button. Then she tapped it. Sent. The screen confirmed the message had gone through. She didn't feel relief. She didn't expect a reply. And honestly, she didn't think she deserved one. But she needed to say it. She stood up, walked to the window, and stared out into the late evening city. Everything moved normally outside. People walking, cars honking, lights changing. But inside, her world felt paused, like she was waiting for something that might never come. A second chance. Not at her job, not even at the airline, but with herself. This incident had forced her to see something she had never questioned. Her own bias, her own pride, her habit of deciding who belonged and who didn't, based on nothing but her perception. It was no longer about Bilal. It was about the mirror she'd been forced to stand in front of. And what she saw now wasn't easy to live with. But maybe, just maybe, it was the beginning of something different. Maybe this time, she wouldn't pretend it was just a bad day or a misunderstood situation. Maybe this time, she'd learn. And if she ever did return to a plane again, it would be as someone who didn't just wear the uniform, but understood the responsibility that came with it. In a quiet corner office high above the city, Bilal sat across from Farah once again. This time not as a victim of someone else's mistake, but as a voice at the center of change. A few days had passed since the flight, and in that short time, the ripple of what happened had already begun touching the wider parts of the airline structure. Farah's desk was clutter-free, her tablet open with reports, employee statements, and outlines of new internal policies. The window behind her framed a clear view of the runway in the distance, planes lifting and landing against the evening sky. But this meeting wasn't about logistics or scheduling. It was about what came next. Bilal leaned back slightly in the chair, listening as Farah explained the steps the company had taken. The incident was documented and reviewed by the Oversight Committee, she said. HR has finished their interviews with crew and passengers, and the Executive Board voted yesterday to implement permanent changes. She turned the tablet toward him. Mandatory annual bias training for all staff, including ground agents. A real-time incident reporting system for in-flight passengers. Flight attendants will no longer have sole authority to remove passengers from their assigned seats without confirmation from the lead crew and digital verification through the passenger manifest. Introduction of an internal panel for reviewing staff misconduct cases involving discrimination, chaired by members of multiple departments, not just management. Bilal studied the list silently. It wasn't just fluff or PR band-aids. These were real systems, barriers built to protect people from what he had experienced. Farah continued, I've had other passengers reach out privately since the story started to circulate. Some shared their own stories. Quiet ones. Moments where they were judged, spoken to differently, made to feel less than. They never complained. Most of them just let it pass. You gave them the space to speak up. Bilal looked down at the polished edge of the table. "I didn't do anything," he said quietly. "You didn't have to," Farah replied. "Your silence in that moment said more than anger ever could." He exhaled slowly. "It shouldn't take someone like me to cause change." "I know," she said, "and we're going to make sure it doesn't happen again." She tapped the screen again and pulled up a new email. "This came in this morning," she said, "from Madison." Bilal didn't ask to see it. He only asked, "Did she take responsibility?" Farah nodded. "Completely. No excuses. No defense. She said she had to sit with herself for a while before she really understood it. She's not asking to keep her job. She just wanted you to know she finally saw what she did." Bilal was quiet. His hands rested on the armrests, fingers gently tapping. "I'm not interested in revenge," he said, "or apologies for the sake of cleaning things up. I want to know that someone like her never gets to walk onto a plane again unless she's changed." Farah agreed. "She won't. And the system that let her believe she was untouchable? That's being dismantled piece by piece." The door opened slightly, and Amina stepped in with 2 documents in hand. "Board needs a final signature on the policy update," she said. Farah glanced at Bilal. "You want to be the one to sign it in?" He took the pen without hesitation. As he scribbled his name on the bottom of the new policy, Farah looked on with something close to pride. "You know," she said softly, "in some way, Madison helped this airline move forward. She exposed the crack we were too comfortable ignoring." Bilal smirked faintly. "Funny how the people who try to keep you out end up forcing the doors open." He stood up, buttoned his jacket again, and shook Farah's hand. "Thank you for listening," he said. Farah met his gaze. "Thank you for not staying quiet." As he walked out of the office, he passed a group of young trainees waiting in the hallway for their orientation tour. Some recognized him. One of them, a girl with dark hair and nervous eyes, smiled slightly as if to say, "I saw what happened." Bilal nodded back once. Subtle but clear. There was no need for speeches, no need for spotlight, because the change was already here. Not in loud announcements or media headlines, but in every policy that now carried his name in its shadow, and in every crew member who would now have to look a little closer before deciding who did and didn't belong. 2 weeks later, a quiet ripple was still moving through the airline industry, and not just within Bilal's company. The story, though never officially released with names, had made its way through blogs, employee forums, even a few whispered news segments. Phrases like, "a passenger removed from first class by mistake," and "a high-level executive disrespected on his own airline," became the subject of conversation among crews, passengers, and senior management across multiple carriers. For many, it was just another incident. But for others, especially those who had once felt overlooked, doubted, or subtly excluded, it was a breakthrough. A reminder that even the quietest humiliation can be seen, and that sometimes dignity doesn't need to shout to be heard. In a training room at the airline's crew headquarters, a fresh batch of flight attendants were seated in rows, watching the orientation screen. On it, a new video had been added to the mandatory course on passenger treatment. It wasn't flashy, no dramatic music, just real examples, real stories, and a line that stayed on the screen longer than anything else. A seat is not just a number, it's a sign of trust. Don't make someone prove they deserve to be where they already belong. At the front of the room, the instructor paused and looked at the trainees. "This isn't just about who flies first class," she said. "It's about why we treat some people differently before we've even said a word to them. That flight didn't go viral because of a fight. It became a moment of change because someone kept their voice steady and let the truth do the speaking." One trainee raised a hand. "Did the crew member get fired?" The instructor didn't answer immediately. "She's no longer flying," she said carefully. "But what matters more is that she realized why it happened. And we're all here now because of that." Meanwhile, across the city, Madison sat in a quiet cafe, a notebook open in front of her. She had stepped away from the industry completely. No interviews, no appeals. She hadn't tried to rewrite the story. She had just stopped. Some days she hated herself for it. Other days she was grateful it happened. She had started writing things down, not as a defense, not as a memoir, but as a process. Each page helped her unpack the years she had spent enforcing rules without always understanding the people behind them. In the margins of the notebook, a phrase kept repeating, "I didn't mean to, but I did." She had written it more than once. Because owning a mistake wasn't a one-time apology, it was a decision to keep holding the mirror, even when it made her uncomfortable. She glanced at her phone. No new messages, no calls from old coworkers. That chapter had closed. But oddly, she didn't feel lost. She felt still. She wasn't the same person who once stood tall at the front of the cabin, calling out instructions with clipped efficiency and forced authority. That person had been peeled away, piece by piece, during the descent of that flight. What was left now was someone who wasn't trying to rebuild her old life, but was learning how to build something different. She turned to a fresh page, wrote the words slowly. "I treated someone like a stranger in a space they belonged in, because I thought I knew better, but I didn't." At the very bottom, she added, "Next time, I'll ask myself why I believe what I believe, before I act." And for the first time in weeks, she didn't feel like she was hiding from the truth. She was walking toward it, and back in the skies, thousands of feet above the earth, another plane carried another set of passengers, another crew, another chance. One more flight, one more opportunity to do it right. Months passed. That flight, became a case study. Not a headline, not a scandal, not even a viral clip, but something more powerful, an internal transformation. Quietly behind boardroom doors and employee-only workshops, it reshaped how an airline thought about power, perception, and responsibility. No dramatic press releases, no sensationalized drama, just changes, implemented with care. The story became a reference point during team meetings. Instructors didn't need to name names anymore. They'd simply say, "You remember what happened last spring, right?" And heads would nod, silently agreeing to remember what they hadn't forgotten. In the boardroom, Bilal took on a new kind of role. He had always been a decision maker, but now he was also a reminder, a living anchor to a standard that no one wanted to slip beneath again. Not because he demanded it, but because he had earned it. The quiet respect he carried became a benchmark, and not just within the airline. Other companies began reaching out, asking for advice on crew culture, policy refinement, passenger rights. It didn't turn him into a celebrity, he didn't want that, but it gave him something more valuable, impact. One rainy morning as he entered the building, a young staffer from the communications team passed him in the hallway. She paused, clearly unsure whether to say something, but then turned back. "Sir?" she asked nervously. He stopped and smiled lightly. "Yes?" "I just wanted to say, I was on that flight," she said. "In economy. I saw everything. I didn't say anything that day, and I've regretted it ever since. But seeing what happened after, how you handled it, I learned something. I'm in a better place now because of it." Bilal didn't interrupt. He let her finish. She looked down for a moment, then said, "Thank you for not yelling, for not letting it go, and for not letting it break you." Bilal nodded gently. "It didn't break me," he said. "It showed me who was ready to fix what was broken." She smiled, grateful, then stepped aside as he continued on his way, his pace as steady as ever. On the other side of the city, Madison was beginning her own kind of return. Not to the airline, not to the skies, but to herself. She had started attending workshops on bias awareness, not because anyone made her, but because she realized she had so much she never bothered to understand. At first, she sat in the back of the room, quiet, guarded, but as the weeks passed, she began to participate. She didn't speak like someone who wanted to defend her past. She spoke like someone who had lived through the cost of never questioning it. She found part-time work at a community center, organizing programs to help underrepresented youth prepare for careers in aviation and travel. The irony wasn't lost on her, but it felt right. For once, she wasn't the one telling people where they could sit. She was helping them realize they could sit anywhere they chose. Sometimes she wondered if Bilal had read her message. She never got a reply, and that was okay. The apology wasn't about being forgiven. It was about acknowledging the truth and letting that truth shape what came next. One evening, she was locking up the center when she saw a teenage boy sitting alone at the bus stop outside. backpack slung over one shoulder, tired eyes staring at the street. She stepped out and approached him. "Long day?" she asked. He looked up, a little startled, then nodded. "Yeah." She smiled. "You know," she said, "I used to think I knew who belonged where. I was wrong. Everyone belongs somewhere. Sometimes people just need someone to believe it with them." The boy didn't understand everything she meant, but he smiled back, and in that small moment, something passed between them, something unspoken but real. That night, Madison went home and wrote in her notebook again, not about regret, but about possibility. And in the air above, another flight took off. New crew, new passengers, same uniforms, but not the same people. Because once a single flight changed everything, not with shouting or chaos or headlines, but with a man who didn't move when told he didn't belong, and a system that finally moved because he chose to stay. If this story made you feel something, give it a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more powerful stories like this one.